welcome, dear guests, Ambassador Allen, who graciously hosted our wonderful, terrific panel discussions at the beautiful House of Sweden earlier today, the Czech Republic's Deputy Chief of Mission, Jan Havranek, descendants of our founder, Charles R. Crane, and family members, trustees, friends, and especially all of the Institute fellows who have survived travel chaos to be here this weekend, and whom ICWA is all about. We have some 40-plus former fellows here with us, and I have to say that this is a very big moment for the Institute. It is our 100th year anniversary. This is an opportunity to reflect on the sweeping changes in our past 100 years, as well as the important work ahead of us during ICWA's second century. But before that, I would like to ask all current and former fellows to please stand. Now, I want to raise a glass with all of you and all of our friends and supporters. Happy 100th birthday to ICWA. I'd like to say a few words about the anthology of fellows writing that we've just published to mark this event and that are in the bottom of your tote bags. It's been a great pleasure putting this together to read through so much wonderful writing. There is witness to history in this book. There is great reportage. There's travel writing and wonderful insights into global cultures and affairs over the last century. This book is very much at the heart of all of the events of this weekend. And what really particularly struck me is that it shows that really what the fellows saw and did and thought during their fellowships in their own words. And what especially struck me was the curiosity and the open-mindedness and the erudition of so many fellows from the very beginning to the present day. I want to say thank you to the Friendship Fund, which is run by the descendants of our founder, Charles Crane, for helping fund its publication. And I want to thank all our supporters for ensuring that our mission continues into a second century. The Institute has advanced understanding of international societies since 1925. We send outstanding young professionals around the world on 2-year fellowships to research, reflect on, and write about globally important topics and become experts on the societies in which they are deeply immersed. A century ago, when we were founded, we helped address a critical need, when the United States was just emerging as a great power and lacked knowledge and experience of much of the world. But in many other ways, America was confronting circumstances and challenges in many ways strikingly similar to today's, as a number of eloquent commentators have already observed before me this year. It was a time of deep economic inequality, with rapidly changing industry and racial demographics. Political violence was rising in the 1920s. And new barriers to immigration included a campaign of deportations and a government crackdown on dissent. And influential figures were warning about a crisis of disinformation in the press that was threatening basic democratic processes. Abroad, the fascism that would later engulf us in world war and unspeakable atrocities was already beginning to rise. Even today's presidential politics echo the 1920s, when public frustration over the ill and aging President Woodrow Wilson helped sweep the Democratic Party out in favor of a Republican candidate offering normalcy, or the nostalgic promise of returning America to the past. With Warren Harding in the White House, one party also controlled all three branches of government. It is fitting that we are marking our centenary here in the Cosmos Club because Charles Crane, our founder, diplomat, philanthropist, and close friend and advisor to President Wilson, made this building his base to be near Wilson after he suffered a stroke. Some of the earliest correspondence establishing the Institute was written here. So you could almost say that ICWA was, well, you could actually say that ICWA was partly born here in the Cosmos Club. Back then, Crane endowed ICWA because he believed that making sense of the complex New World Order and determining America's role in the New World Order demanded firsthand experience. He called it his doctrine. To understand foreign countries, one had to know the language, the culture, economic and social lives of their people, their hopes, as well as their politics. But the Institute was originally the brainchild of its two other co-founders. One of them was Charles Crane's 25-year-old son, John O. Crane. A Harvard graduate based in Prague, he was serving as personal secretary to the first president of independent Czechoslovakia, the philosophy scholar Tomáš Masaryk, whom Charles Crane had championed here in Washington. John became the Institute's first fellow. The third founder was the Institute's first executive director, Walter Rogers. He was an ambitious journalist and a lawyer, and he was an early champion of international press freedom, whom President Wilson had appointed to launch a global news organization that would oversee networks of radio, telegraph, and cable agencies. Its aim was to counter the commercialization of broadcasting and sensationalizing news and propaganda by providing authoritative reporting from the ground about current events in the world. Rogers believed that that was crucial for the developing new international liberalism. The project was sunk mainly by commercial interests, the existing major newswire services. But Rogers' motivations would inform his approach to ICWA. It would take several iterations to fully develop the Institute's fellowship in the form that it would assume to this day. The first idea was for something called the Mutual News Exchange, with the motto, "Truth will conquer." As Rogers wrote Crane from the Cosmos Club in 1923, it would produce reports from around the world about, quote, the entire field of human activity. The general aim will be to bring about the broadest presentation of the forces and personalities at work in the world. The project eventually developed into something closer to a think tank with 12 fellows with lifetime tenure, and it was incorporated in New York in October 1925. Soon after, it settled into what it is today. Again, quoting John Crane, a rigorous, modern, intellectual training ground, as he called it, for fellows who would go into journalism, diplomacy, business, civil society, and many other fields. In the 1930s and 40s, ICWA helped launch the careers of scholars who would help establish the study of international affairs in the United States. They included a young Harvard Law School graduate named John Hazard, who traveled the Soviet Union as a fellow at the height of Stalin's Great Terror. And he went on to become one of the leading Western scholars of Soviet law, who helped found Columbia University's Russian Institute, later the Harriman Institute, where he mentored generations of future leading experts, including my father, who was a journalist on Russia. Doak Barnett carried out his first intensive study of Chinese culture and politics in the 1940s as a fellow, before becoming a prolific scholar who would be instrumental in the opening of relations with China in 1972. And Pramila Jayapal, a congresswoman who's one of the leading progressive voices in American politics, who was born in India and came to the United States by herself at the age of 16 to attend college at Georgetown University. She returned to India in 1995 as an ICWA fellow to rediscover her native country and study social issues, religion, the status of women, and AIDS. The list goes on and on to this day. Yesterday, our most recent alumnus, Edric Huang, reported at the Human Rights Campaign about his 2 years in Taiwan examining LGBTQ+ rights and their place in politics. Edric, may I ask you to please stand? Would everybody please raise a glass to Edric? Congratulations. Here, here. So I usually say a few words about what our current fellows out in the field are doing at the moment. Today they can speak for themselves. Brett Simpson and Roland Robinson, would you please stand? Before you all start peppering them with questions, they'll give a taste of what their fellowship was like on the ground in a very short video. Hello again. You've heard about why we think the ICWA Fellowship is great. It's also unique. Whatever the important topics that fellows examine and write about each month, they're encouraged to experiment, to travel, follow promising new leads, and drop dead ends. And through that independent, self-directed process, develop their own voices, in addition to deepening our understanding of the cultures and societies in which they're based. Our current fellows reflect the diversity and importance of the subjects we investigate. Both fellows are drawing vital lessons for U.S. policy. Andrew Weil Fellow Roland Robinson is comparing integrative healthcare for substance abuse and addiction in 3 different places: the Netherlands, Portugal, and Brazil.
Hey, bom dia de Portugal, where I've been learning about the reforms of the year 2000 here in Portugal. And so it's been fascinating to see how, those reforms from 25 years ago are still holding up today, talking with housing services, harm reduction services, treatment centers, therapeutic communities, and so forth, and just everyday Portuguese, and understand how do they experience reform. Did the culture around drug use change? Was it accepted and was it not? It's been really fascinating here, learning about that, talking with people here, and I just want to thank ICWA for having me out here, and looking forward to the next adventure. Hello for the last time from Brazil, where I've been hitting the streets of Cracolândia and the favelas to understand how public health is administered here in Brazil. And when I'm not, hitting the streets, I'm hitting the water. I wonder what Brett's doing right now.
Brett Simpson, the Institute's first Peter Bird Martin Fellow, is an environment journalist based in the world's northernmost city.
Hi, this is Brett Simpson. I am in Tromsø, Norway, more than 200 miles north of the Arctic Circle. And thanks to the generosity of ICWA, I am here reporting on the fastest warming part of the planet, all of the geopolitical changes that are happening here, and also just society, culture, ecosystems, and people. What happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. This matters to you in the US because all the changes that are starting here echo out to the rest of the globe. Thank you again.
ICWA nurtures deep understanding of international cultures and affairs to ensure that America's role in the world is informed by wisdom, foresight, and compassion. It's a mark of the fellowship's success that it has remained largely unchanged since its launch a century ago, when Americans had little knowledge of Asia, Africa, and other parts of the world. We've heard from 2 current fellows and future leading experts. We'll close with a former fellow and board chair. Joe Batat is a distinguished witness of ICWA's transformational power.
My mentor at MIT saw that I was struggling to do something about China, which at that time China was closed up. So he told me one day, there is something called Institute of Current World Affairs. The fellowship allowed me to build an understanding of China, which I used very, very much when I was working for 25 years at the World Bank. One of the projects I ran won a World Bank-wide award, Had I not have done this fellowship, I may not have been able to be as successful as I was. ICWA is relevant even more so now when we are bombarded by instant information coming from all over the world. Accessing that information is one thing. Understanding its complexity and how to use it is another. And that's what the ICWA Fellowship gives you.
So now about the future, starting with the very immediate future. We have 6 finalist candidates for the next fellowships, and may I ask you to please stand. Sabrina Ochoa, Diana Krusman, Molly Knutson, Clara Fong, Ben Walker, and Ned Flanagan. The trustees will select the winners after the next board meeting this Sunday. They are all terrific proposals. Good luck to all of you. And I'm absolutely delighted to announce a new fellowship for next year, the Rydell Rissa Disarmament Fellowship, aimed at examining education about disarmament, and we hope it will eventually become an endowed disarmament fellowship in perpetuity. It is made possible by the financial support of Randall Rydell and his wife, Elizabeth Rissa, and I'm delighted that Randy is here with us, and I'd like to ask him to say a couple of words. Randy, would you please come up to the podium? And let me just... Randy is a leading expert on nuclear disarmament. Among many other roles, he was the senior political affairs officer and strategic planning unit leader for the UN's High Representative for Disarmament Affairs. Thanks, Randy.
Thank you very much, Greg. Many decades ago, a UN ambassador from Cyprus once said, quote, "To disarm is an irregular verb with no first-person singular and only a future tense." How apt that observation remains today. Let's recall that almost 80 years ago, the UN General Assembly adopted its first resolution, which called for the elimination of nuclear weapons. Yet we see that trillions have been spent on producing, deploying, and modernizing nuclear arsenals, and trillions more are in the pipeline. Each day we see new threats to use such weapons or to resume nuclear testing. Over 10,000 still exist, despite a commitment in the 1970 Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty requiring its parties to enter into negotiations in good faith on nuclear disarmament. Such negotiations have never happened. And not surprisingly, there are no disarmament agencies, no disarmament plans, budgets, and legislation to achieve this goal. Meanwhile, other countries are exploring their own nuclear options and have already achieved them, some of them. Experts say that, quote, "the lack of political will is the culprit." And what is political will, if not demonstrated by concrete actions based on firm purposes? A great coalition of support, and perhaps most important, a foundation of knowledge and facts. An educated citizenry is essential in building widespread recognition, not just of the horrors of nuclear weapons, but the great dividends that would be achieved through their reduction, elimination, and prohibition. Failure to pursue and achieve disarmament would guarantee the continued prospect of use of such weapons, which would be catastrophic for humanity, and a nuclear war would jeopardize all the great goals of both the United Nations and the Institute of Current World Affairs. Yet its achievement would eliminate our gravest national and international threat while releasing trillions to meet unmet social and economic needs of humanity. Now, two conclusions. First, progress in disarmament is unquestionably in the interest of the nation and the world. As former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon once stressed, it is a, quote, global public good of the highest order. Second, progress requires a sustained public awareness of the multiple nuclear crises we face today. And this points the way to discovering what is working in how people learn about disarmament, what has not worked, and what reforms can make education at all levels more effective in achieving this goal. The great educator Horace Mann once said, "Be ashamed to die before you have won some victory for humanity." I hope the Rydell Friese Disarmament Education Fellowship can serve to remind us of our shortcomings in this field and point the way ahead to a more peaceful, secure, and prosperous world for all. A greater victory can scarcely be found for our country and all humanity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Randy. The ICWA Fellowship is still going strong after 100 years because it gives highly promising young professionals the time and resources to conduct independent, self-directed research, reflection, and writing that facilitates deep cultural immersion. I experienced that for myself when I was a fellow in Russia a quarter century ago during Vladimir Putin's first term as president. I remember being inside Moscow's sprawling television studio compound in 2001, witnessing the final days of a standoff between the Kremlin and the journalists of the country's leading independent television channel, NTV. One of the station's anchors described the state takeover as the point of no return for Russia. Putin himself said virtually nothing about the seizure. It was presented merely as a business affair. The channel was supposedly losing money and needed restructuring, which was enough to mollify most Russians. And it was a model for how the Kremlin took control of other industries. And it was also an important lesson for me. I know firsthand that it is more crucial than ever for the public to understand the forces at work in the world. 100 years after ICWA's founding, we are once again living in a crisis of information, when news media shy away from or even lack the right language to describe what's going on today. Charles and John Crane and Walter Rogers understood that dynamic, and they set up ICWA to advance genuine understanding about global affairs. And not just the news, but why. And we look forward to doing it for another century. Thank you all. Now, as you know, the Crane family was very invested in the independence of Czechoslovakia in 1918, one of Charles Crane's most successful causes, probably his most successful foreign cause. So now I would like to ask our friend, the Czech Deputy Chief of Mission, Jan Havranek, to say a few words. Jan, on top of everything else, is a leading foreign policy expert. He was previously Deputy Defense Minister in Prague, and I know for a fact that he's going on to more great roles. Jan.
Thank you, Greg, and good evening. What an honor and privilege to be here with all of you tonight to celebrate 100 years of ICWA. I've only known Greg and the team for about 3-4 years, but I've come to recognize the Institute's importance, and it has always been about more than fellowships. It was been about the people, the ideas, and connections that shape the world, and you've just heard it from the director himself. But Greg asked me to keep it short, actually 5 minutes only. So I want to focus on 3 points. First of all, the Czech and ICWA connection. I mean, you stole my thunder a little bit, but there is still something more to say. Then I want to share with you a short message on the state of the transatlantic partnership, which is my daily job, my daily bread. And I want to also leave you with a message of hope. I mean, yes, you need a Czech to do that for you. Anyways, so obviously as we dine and gather here tonight, history feels very much present and very close. And as you've heard from Greg, it was here at the Cosmos Club that a story unfolded that changed the fate of my country, my people. Charles Crane, a frequent guest here, befriended Thomas Garrick Masaryk, a professor and a future politician who would become the first president of Czechoslovakia. And Crane brought Masaryk to President Wilson just around the corner to the Wilson House. And I think they met several times. And at those meetings, these meetings were what secured the independence and recognition of Czechoslovakia in 1918. Now, there is much more to that Crane, Masaryk, Czechoslovakia story than we've already seen, in the image of John Crane. It was also Jan Masaryk, the future ambassador to the United States, ambassador to the UK, future foreign minister who perished in 1948 in the communist coup in Czechoslovakia later. But it was him who actually married one of Charles Crane's daughters, and another of Charles Crane's daughters, she posed on the first Czechoslovak banknote. So you could, for Alfons Mucha, also an icon of his age. So there is a lot that we feel particularly attached to this place. And if you step outside on the Massachusetts Avenue, you see the Masaryk statue just right across the street. And so it is no coincidence that our embassy just earlier this year in the summer bought a building next door, which we will turn into a political headquarters soon of our embassy. So it's our return to Massachusetts Avenue. We started calling this little corner Little Bohemia. So I'm making it official now here tonight. All we're missing is just maybe a brewery and whatnot. But in all seriousness, this friendship, this testament is a reminder that the nations can be born not only by armies and treaties, but also by friendships and conversations and human trust. Now, that brings me, to the current times, a century later. The world does feel unsettled. I mean, Russia's war in Ukraine, conflict in the Middle East, growing competition among great powers, questions about democracy, our institutions, the system. And in such a world, and I might be still naive, but I still believe that the bond between America and Europe is not just a relic of the past, as it may seem. It is a lifeline for our future. NATO is not just a military alliance. It is a community of free nations who believe in security is stronger when it's shared. And institutions like ICWA make that bond also real. I mean, you send people to the world of fellows not to defend a particular ideology or a particular view, but really to understand cultures, to understand nations, understand one another. And I think to build the knowledge and empathy that leaders depend on is very important, when crises come. So that brings me to my last point, which is my message of hope. So yes, the world is complex. Yes, politics today can feel bitter and frustrating, but I do believe there is hope beyond that noise, beyond that technology. People still reach out to one another. And friendships still form across borders and conversations still matter. I mean, if we remember Masaryk and Crane, a single introduction, a single conversation, one human connection can put an idea of a nation into reality. And if it was possible 100 years ago or 107 years ago, I think, I do believe it's possible now. And so ICWA has been building those bridges for 100 years, patiently, quietly, sometimes not so quietly, but that's okay. One fellow at a time, and that is the gift to the world and the message for us tonight that in difficult times, never lose faith in the human connection, and I think the human connection is really all we have left. So let us celebrate ICWA's century of courage and curiosity, and let us carry forward that message of hope that even in the most difficult moments, as world is challenging and sometimes feels unraveling, people talking to people can change history and can make the world slightly better. So congratulations to ICWA. Here's to another 100 years. Thank you.
Tough act to follow. Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Duszek. I'm an ICWA trustee and former fellow. A long time ago, I went to Romania in 2004 and spent 2 years there studying the country's transition from communism. But I'm actually here to introduce Andrew Weil, who unfortunately couldn't be here. And Andrew is the sponsor of ICWA's current Andrew Weil Fellow, Roland Robinson, whose very fancy video we just watched. And Greg, you and I did not have that luxury of being in fancy videos. Anyway, Andrew did send a video, and we'll watch it shortly, but I wanted to say a few things about him. Andrew Weil is a pioneering expert on integrative medicine and an ICWA alumnus who dedicated his fellowship in Colombia, Mexico, Costa Rica, and United States during his fellowship from 1971 to 75. He studied drug use, medicinal plants, and alternative methods of treating disease. Andrew is the founder and director of the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine at the University of Arizona, founder and chairman of the Weil Foundation, founder and co-chairman of Healthy Lifestyle Brands, and a co-founder of True Food Kitchen, which is one of my favorite restaurants out west. After earning a bachelor's degree from Harvard, where he studied biology and ethnobotany, he went on to graduate from Harvard's medical school and authored numerous books on health, well-being, and consciousness. I have long been a fan of Andrew's, and I first got to know him as Oprah's wellness guru. It seems I even followed in his footsteps, just a few decades behind. We have in common Harvard, ICWA, even briefly Tucson and University of Arizona. I got to meet Andrew several years ago in Tucson when I helped organize the announcement of the launch of his Center for Integrative Medicine. As it happens with everything ICWA, I think we all agree that we are all an amazing community of trailblazers and enterprising internationalists. And Andrew exemplifies that incredibly well. So cheers to him, cheers to us, and let's hear from him.
Hello, Dr. Andrew Weil here. First, let me congratulate the whole Institute family on the occasion of your 100th anniversary. That's just a great achievement, and I'm very proud to have been part of that history. I was a fellow of the Institute between 1971 and 1975. My fellowship was a departure for the Institute. Dick Nolte, who was director then, allowed me to pursue investigations of altered states of consciousness, drug use in other cultures, alternative healing. These were topics not covered by other fellows at that time, but it was a very rewarding experience for me. And I wrote the newsletters, my letters to Dear Mr. Nolte, and those were collected and published as my second book. The book is still in print under the title The Marriage of the Sun and Moon. I also wrote in those newsletters as a fellow about alternative medicine. That really laid the foundation for my subsequent work in the field of integrative medicine, which I helped found. I think this represents the future of healthcare. I'm the founder of what is now called the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine at the College of Medicine at the University of Arizona. We have a condensed curriculum called Integrative Medicine in Residency that's now on, I think, 120 residency programs in the US and Canada and elsewhere. And my hope is that one day this will be universal, and whether you go to a psychiatrist or dermatologist or gastroenterologist, that practitioner will have had basic education in lifestyle medicine, in nutritional influences on health, in mind-body medicine, will know how to make referrals to other kinds of practitioners. I think this is a very realistic goal. And I really trace the origins of my philosophy about this field to those years that I spent as a fellow of the Institute, in which I immersed myself in other cultures, saw healers, saw other kinds of practices, explored the mind-body connection, made observations about how other societies live in harmony with psychoactive plants. All of that quite relevant to our situation today. So again, congratulations to all of you. I wish I could be there in person, and the Institute remains, a very dear part of my experience in my life, and I hope to continue to participate in the future. Have a wonderful celebration.
Hello, my name is Susan Brind Morrow, and I'm a trustee of the foundation. I was a fellow between 1988 and 1990 in the Red Sea Hills between Egypt and Sudan. And the way that I became a fellow was that I had an old friend named Neil McFarquhar, and he was actually up for the fellowship to go to Afghanistan to live with the Mujahideen back in the 80s. He decided that he wasn't going to do it. He was going to train for the New York Times, and ultimately he became the New York Times bureau chief for the Middle East and covered the wars in Syria and Iraq. But he said to me at the time, you do it, you go for the fellowship. So I had not heard of it before, and so I became the Mideast candidate, and it enabled me to really, it was a purely aesthetic impulse. I had gone out to work in the Western Desert, out of classics at Columbia, and a student of Arabic as well. I'd gone out to work in the Western Desert, in the Libyan Desert as an archaeologist, and had lived in Egypt and Sudan. And so I went back and had this wonderful fellowship, just but just living among nomadic people, and seeing how much I was so absorbed in how much they knew. These are people who didn't read, but just knew exactly when rain fell, how long plants would come up in certain kinds of wadis, and all kinds of things. Anyway, during that time, I married my husband, Lance Morrow, who was writing 2 back-to-back cover stories for Time magazine on Israel-Palestine. And so I would go up to see him in Jerusalem, where he was living at the American colony, and drive around Gaza and interview the people in the camps and in the Israeli military. And that was almost 40 years ago. And so I wanted to say about the foundation that it always has reminded me of Champlain, whose notebooks I've read, and who would come over here to the Finger Lakes where I grew up, Canada, the Great Lakes area, with 20 Frenchmen, all of whom would die, and he would just love it and go off with the tribes and learn the languages and learn the routes inland. And he wasn't trying to get them to do anything. He just wanted to soak it up. And that's how I've always thought of the Institute Fellows. That's certainly how I felt. So today, I'm introducing our wonderful speaker, who is also a New York Times and reminds me of Neil. And so the only thing I can do is, there's so much to it that I just have to read. I'm afraid. Serge Schmemann, who is we're very honored to have you here speaking for the Institute. He's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, author and a member of the New York Times editorial board, a graduate of Harvard College, reported for the Associated Press before joining the Times in 1980, correspondent and bureau chief in Moscow, Bonn, and Jerusalem, and at the United Nations, He was the editorial page editor of the International Herald Tribune, Deputy Times foreign editor for New York in 1999 to 2001, and has also won an Emmy Award in 2003 for his work on a television documentary about the Israeli-Palestine conflict. So this is why I wanted to talk about my own background. But we're very honored to have you here.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed fellows of ICWA, dear friends. I want to thank you for the very nice introduction, Susan. My heartfelt congratulations to ICWA for this centennial birthday celebration. I must say I can imagine no better way to celebrate a birthday than with that wonderful hootenanny we had, the sing-along. It was a lot of fun. It's a great honor to be invited to speak at this event because it is, as we have seen from all these presentations and speeches, a great institution that has done great work. But I do wonder, and I should have spoken to Greg about this, whether inviting a dinosaur to make the comments is really the best idea for this. I think Dr. Bachetti, who's a gerontologist, as I gather, indeed, will, apart from being a great singer, he's a great gerontologist, and he will probably confirm that old folks tend to lean to nostalgia when they speak, and to glorify the past, fear the present, and sort of steer you towards the wrong direction. I mean, I once went to a wedding at one of these no frills, no booze religious communes where they served only grape juice, and all the speeches sounded like eulogies. You know, so dear Jack and Jill, you've decided to get married even though the world is decadent, immoral, corrupt, and getting worse. So good luck to you. And that's what we media dinosaurs do, I'm afraid. We moan about how great everything was before and how the world is tumbling headlong into dictatorship, war, artificial intelligence, Chinese dominance, in everything, terminal polarization, superstition, and nobody even reads newspapers anymore. But good luck to you. So I'm trying to resist this temptation, but those of you here with gray hair, or no hair, have to agree with that the world really looked a lot more hopeful, or at least more understandable a few short decades ago. Certainly, reporting was a lot more fun. For one thing, there were many more newspapers. I don't know if you know this, but 2,900 dailies and weeklies have folded since 2005, and they're continuing to disappear at the rate of about 2 per week. Those that have survived have a lot less money, since the advertising that formed the basis for journalism in the golden age has disappeared into the internet. Well, thankfully, my paper, the New York Times, which I joined, as it was pointed out, in 1980, which is a few years ago, has been a shining exception. The paper recently broke 12 million paid subscriptions, and it's well on the way to 15 million by 2027. I think we have to thank God for that, but also the Sulzberger family, who've shown an extraordinarily wise strategy for advancing in this age. But one great paper is not enough. It is my strong conviction that the crisis democracy is going through in America, elsewhere in the world, is at least partially due to the loss of local papers that served as the building blocks of democracy, community, and politics. They trained reporters in the virtue of accuracy and fairness and taught readers to trust shared information. Now, maybe I'll just pause here. I'd like to share a little anecdote from my days at this paper, the News Tribune in Woodbridge, New Jersey. You all know Woodbridge very well as Exit 11 on the New Jersey Turnpike. But it was a nice community like every other community across America, a paper of about 58,000 readers. And it took accuracy and fairness so seriously that when a new reporter like me made his, in my case, or her first mistake that required a correction, we had to get up on the news desk in the middle of the newsroom and eat a hot chili pepper. So the tears flowed, the lesson was learned. You know, accuracy was religion at a paper, and you start with that and you really learn the basics because everybody you're writing for is a neighbor, is somebody who will call you. And when you report something, your phone, the 4 buttons on your phone begin to glow simultaneously. Now, I look back on my time as a reporter as the golden age of American journalism. Major news organizations like the Times, like the AP, where I went next, had oodles of cash. And so if I decided to do a story, for example, in Siberia, which I did once I landed in Moscow, I just took off. I didn't have to wait for somebody to check if we had the money to do it. I didn't have to wait for some budgetary approval. I just went and followed my nose. Now, better even than that, there were no mobile phones to keep the foreign editor on your back, and no internet that had to be fed every few seconds. I committed most of my journalism before the onset of mobile phones or the internet, and I've often wondered what it would have been like to cover, for example, the fall of the Berlin Wall, which took a lot of work that night, if I had to stop every 10 minutes and feed the web and feed Facebook or whatever that we'd have to do. Plus, nobody in that era had really heard of fake news or Fox News, so we were pretty solid in what we did. Now, we used to tell everybody who'd listen that we had the best job in the world, and most of us actually believed it. I mean, we were paid to explore the world, to have wild adventures, to meet extraordinary people, to cover remarkable historic events, all in exchange for just a few stories per month, per week maybe. Now here this evening, listening to people who've preceded me, I find that all along there's been an even better gig out there. It turns out that for a century now, ICWA has been providing fellows with everything we had back in the day, funds to travel, whatever they want to do to have crazy adventures. I mean, if you read one of the handouts you got, it so eloquently puts it, they're encouraged to follow their noses into any and all interesting avenues of inquiry. Now that's a gig, and that is something that I missed out on, I'm ashamed to say. I looked up, we met earlier, Brett Simpson, who's hanging out 200 miles above the Arctic Circle. I am so jealous when I heard that. I think I would be up there in a flash. So I think this is truly a wonderful program, and I wish all of you incredible success. Now, the downside about these fellowships is that you have to be under 36 to be a fellow. Am I right, Greg? It's sad, as our president would say. I'm finding that ageism is really the curse of our times, more and more. In fact, about the only place somebody like me can get a job anymore, apart from the one I have, would be to be the president in the White House. But I was born abroad, so I'm not eligible quite yet. But seriously, I congratulate the fellows here present and Greg and his staff and the trustees of ICWA on this really wonderful anniversary. You're doing what we as foreign correspondents aspired to do when we went out in the field, to make sense of a complicated world, to share your experiences, and thus broadening not only your own minds, but also our minds. It's a very worthy and critical mission. Only I should warn you that it has become infinitely more complicated than it has been in the past. I mean, I think as Jan Havernick pointed out, this has become a ridiculously complicated world, and it needs far more work to understand and to explain than it did in my day. And it's also become far more dangerous to be out there. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, which follows these things, 361 journalists were behind bars in 2024, the second highest number since 2022, which was the highest, and most of them have been imprisoned by sleazy autocrats whose number is also growing. A record 124 journalists and news workers were killed last year, most of them Palestinians killed by Israel's in Gaza. This year, the overall death toll is already at 122. I'd like to just pause here for a minute and pay tribute to those courageous Palestinian journalists. Israel claims that some of them were Hamas agents. No doubt some were affiliated with Hamas. That's the nature of Gaza. But many of them worked for us, for the New York Times, and for other news organizations, and they were real and extraordinarily courageous journalists, risking their lives every day to inform the world about Gaza when the international press was barred from doing so. So I just want to give them a shout out. Thank you. So to those of you who are headed for troubled zones, stay safe, and good luck in trying to make sense of the world out there, or for that matter, making sense of the world back here. Again, I know I should avoid the senior citizen thing about sort of being too nostalgic about the past. But, I mean, that's all I can really do at my age, is look back and see where it all came from. And today it seems to me not only that everything is upheaval, every certainty, every institution, every tradition is being disrupted. Democracy is eroding, China's rising, war in Ukraine is raging, AI is promising to resolve everything, and at the same time it's scaring the crap out of all of us. And all the convenient binary systems we grew up on over the past century have become hopelessly muddled, like east-west, north-south, communist-capitalist. Those categories are gone. My old friend and colleague, Tom Friedman, who once pioneered the notion that the world is flat, I wonder if that still holds, he wrote a column earlier this week that you might have seen, searching for a label for our current era and its ever-shifting loyalties, its changing climate, its exploding technologies, mass migration, turbulent geopolitics, geoeconomics, and all the other things that are confusing me and many others. So let me just read what he wrote. As a foreign affairs columnist, I now have to track the impact and interactions of not only superpowers, but also super intelligent machines, super empowered individuals taking advantage of technology to extend their research in super global corporations, as well as superstorms and super failing states like Libya and, alas, Sudan. The label Tom proposed for our era was Polycene, Polycene, combining poly, the Greek word for many, with scene, the suffix denoting geological eras. The idea was to capture the explosive way in which everything is now connected to everything else, artificial intelligence to climate change to biotechnics to geopolitics. The Polycene, in Tom's conception, would succeed the Anthropocene, which is the current era in which humanity became the primary force of change on Earth. Now, I wish Tom luck in getting this term accepted. There is great prestige in finding the right term for an era. You'll be forever on Wikipedia. And I'd like to throw out my own candidate. It would be Time of Troubles, though when I looked that up, it seems that's already been taken. But for those of you who know Russian, it's really a little bit different. The real Russian word was smutne vremya, which translates far better as time of confusion. And that's still available if you'd like to spread it. But in that spirit, in the spirit of total confusion, I'd like to turn, in the time left me, and Greg has been very strict about time here, to focus on the question that most concerns me today. And that's trying to figure out where all this is headed. Where is a divided America heading? Are we in terminal decline? Why is Netanyahu still in power? Will Putin's successors be even worse, which I suspect is the case? Will AI make me redundant, or even more redundant, I should say? Or are we just going through another cyclical patch of realignment, like the Enlightenment or like an extinction event? What's missing for me in all this and what's going on in the world today is any unifying factor, any glimmer of a North Star somewhere that would put some sense, that would tie all these strands together towards one hopeful end. Because for those of us who came of age in the 1960s, which was a period like the present of acute polarization, abuse of power, warring ideologies, battles in the street, and all the rest, we have a tendency to try to find parallels with what's happening today, to see if maybe, from what we've seen, that maybe history does teach something, maybe we can find some direction in all this confusion. And superficially, of course, social convulsions all look very much alike. Richard Nixon's silent majority battled radical commies, much as Donald Trump's MAGA assails wokeness and the radical left. And students campaigning in the Columbia campus last year were very reminiscent of the protests there that I actually witnessed back in the 60s. But it quickly becomes obvious that the differences are far greater. Some are self-evident. There was no social media then. There is no draft today to threaten young men with very coercive prospect of dying in a distant jungle. And of course, the scale of the current confrontations are now nowhere near the street violence of the Vietnam War. I mean, the radical left's reign of terror that the White House sees in Portland is a little bit different from the 23,000 police and National Guardsmen who confronted 10,000 demonstrators in Chicago in '68. For me, however, the big difference is in the spirit of the times. The sense back then that change was possible, that change was imminent. and today, the sense that we really have no idea where we're going. I mean, for all their passions and violence, the 1960s were really an eruption of idealism, a youth-led rebellion against a misguided war, and the racism and misogyny lurking in the Pleasantville suburbs of the 1950s. There was a conviction in all the songs and the love-ins and the protests that the world would be, and soon, a better place. I mean, Bob Dylan had the anthem of the times they are a-changing, and of course you all know John Lennon imagined this utopia. Imagine there's no countries, it isn't hard to do, nothing to kill or die for, no religion too. I might strike that last one, but the rest sounded quite beautiful. What gave hope back then was not only the idealism of the students, but the sense that at its core, the values and ideals of students were really the same as those of the people they were fighting, only with different avenues to the same end. Yes, the Vietnam War was misguided. Yes, McNamara and others deliberately concealed that it was unwinnable, and yes, it proved a disaster. But you have to remember that it was John Kennedy who got America into the war, the same Kennedy who said, "Ask not what your country can do for you." And it was LBJ who continued it, the same LBJ who introduced Great Society. The goal, there was a shared goal, an America that would be good, that would be just, that would be fair. It's only that the two sides saw the means that were being employed as wrong on the other side, that they competed about how to get there. Now, I personally, back in that era, had difficulty taking a strong stand on either side. I sort of saw the wisdom of both. That kind of misguided neutrality had two consequences. One is that I was sent to Vietnam. The other was that I became a reporter. Because trying to figure out what on earth is going on, and as a foreign correspondent, though, I had the fortune of covering some of the major stories of the time, and they were all, like the 60s, were somehow suffused with hope. My first assignment was in Southern Africa in the 70s. Apartheid was still in force. In South Africa, the Civil War was raging. It was in what was then Rhodesia. But everything pointed to a new day just about to dawn. And we Americans were the good guys. I mean, I remember well visiting a school in Soweto. My wife, Mary, who's here, was with me, and her brother. And the teacher had the entire class stand up and say, "Thank you, America." Even better, we felt we deserved it. We felt America was on the side of equality, justice, good, the side of the future. And then moving along in the 80s, we were in the Soviet Union watching the old guard die off one by one until Gorbachev came to power, bringing hope and change. Then we were in Germany to witness the fall of the Berlin Wall, one of the most powerful eruptions of joy I've ever witnessed. And from Germany, we watched regimes collapse in Poland, Hungary, communist regimes collapse in Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, and finally in the Soviet Union itself. My family actually witnessed the moment, now accepted as the minute when the Soviet Union reached its formal end. It was Christmas Day, 91, and our kids were visiting, including Anya, who's here this evening, and my wife. And they had gone to Red Square under a light wet snow because there was not much else to do that Christmas Eve. And I was in the office when my wife called. The old Soviet flag with its hammer and sickle was coming down, she said, and the pre-revolutionary white, blue, and red flag was going up. It was 7:32 p.m. I put that into the paper that night in my obituary for the Soviet Union, and it was over. It was really an exciting moment of history, but not my last hope-filled assignment. That was actually in Israel in the late 90s, when the Oslo Accords, which had been signed in 93 and 95, were still promising a new era of peace under two separate neighboring states. My first major story was actually the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin on November 4th, 1995. But even in the global outpouring of grief, there was a conviction that the drive to peace had been rendered irreversible by the martyrdom of its hero. Nobody was blind to the fact that these historical moments, in these historical moments, that more trouble lay ahead. I just today was looking through and I found a piece I wrote for the Week in Review that I think expresses what we were feeling at that time. So if you don't mind, I'll read from a bit of my own journalism. This was written in August after the putsch in Russia had just collapsed. To shed a dictatorship is not to guarantee democracy. The replacement of the old hammer and sickles by the imperial flag seems both a moving reaffirmation of severed roots and an alarming foretaste of national wrangles to come. The declaration of independence in the Ukraine and Estonia in the last few days were both a triumph of national aspirations and the opening shot of new tribulations. Yet to have been at a nighttime march in Leipzig, to have witnessed the proclamation of a republic in Budapest, to have sensed the pride of those who faced guns in Timisoara, to have wandered among the barricades in Moscow, is to have known moments when doubts and differences are suspended and people come together in a single-minded quest. It may sound mawkish, but call it freedom. Now it's different today. Just the other day, we were having dinner with Russians now living in America, and they asked me, why is the American press no longer covering the dissidents in Russia? There are many Russians who are opposing Putin, who sit in prison, who fled the country. We're not writing about them. Why not? Isn't this the same people suppressed under a dictatorship in Russia? It's really not an easy question. I'm of a Russian background myself. And I often wonder, I often feel shame at what it is now to be a Russian. What has changed? The reason, I think, why we have maybe abandoned the Russians who opposed Putin in a way is, well, for one thing, we don't have a lot of reporters over there anymore, but the dissidents of the last century promised a better future, while Putin's opponents today are perceived as helpless victims of a Russia that had a chance but turned its back on the future. So what now? I don't think we're not going back to the past, either to the 60s or the 50s or the convenient binaries of the Cold War or to an American-led liberal order. Those things are all gone. But in addition to chronic nostalgia, old age does offer a bit of perspective. We know that the Holocene won't be the last age. We've survived worse. We've even survived extinction events. We'll get past this one too. And we've done quite a bit that we should be proud of, and maybe someday we'll see them as the building blocks of the new era. We got through COVID, which was an extraordinary feat, which will someday get its proper due the way we resolved it. My youngest daughter was a teacher who, sitting in a cabin in Canada, invented a whole new way to teach first graders on the internet. It was extraordinary what the teachers achieved. The government shutdown, I hope, is now going to make us more aware that polarization is simply not sustainable. Artificial intelligence is prompting some exceptional debate and discussions among all of us, and certainly with my grandsons, on the future of creativity, of work, and of life. And even the news business seems to be perking up. All sorts of innovative new outlets are cropping up here and there. And finally, far from least, there are these wonderful fellows who are competing to go abroad and start looking at the world again and start telling us what is good out there, what is bad, what needs to change, and how it needs to change. I can hardly wait to hear their reports. Perhaps if you're lucky, you'll even come up with the best label for this confusing time we're living in. So good luck to you, and thank you all very much. Thank you. Whoever left a spoon back here can come up and claim it later. Do we have questions?
Serge will take questions from anyone, I hope.
Yeah, with your help, because
Please raise your hand,
I
anyone.
may not understand them well. Shoot.
Serge, thank you for just a wonderful talk that covered so much. I have a sort of I guess a logistical question for you about the New York Times editorial meeting and discussion and thinking process. Since the last election, how much has changed when you gather together and you think about what we're going to write about, what issues we're going to cover, how we're going to do it? How much has changed, or maybe it hasn't. Maybe the Times still hews to the same calculus.
No, the whole approach to editorials has changed fairly radically at the Times in recent years. When I joined the board, I actually spent 17 years in Paris doing the editorial page of the International Herald Tribune. At that time, I was also a member of the Times editorial board. We had 2 meetings a week, and we ground out 3 editorials a day, as the Washington Post still does. But our new publisher, A.G. Sulzberger, has had some serious doubts and questions about the value of editorials. Many papers have. Should we be out there pontificating? Should we be out there endorsing candidates? And he was very skeptical, and so caused a lot of re-examination. We now carry far fewer editorials. We were down to 1 a week. We're back up to 2 or 3, but they come rarely, and they're the product of a lot of discussion. And it's no longer a board of 12 people who just grind out ideas and write about them. It's really everybody in the opinion section, including the writers who write them. I write many of the ones on foreign affairs, but everybody participates. We try to find experts and try to say something that will really make a difference and not to do it routinely. We, of course, a lot of the discussions are how to handle this administration, because we don't want to just sit there and be sort of routine Trump bashers and play. We know where our readership stands, so we comment on the administration and what it's doing only when we feel it really requires a major comment, and when necessary, we even welcome, for example, what Donald Trump has done in Israel to stop the fighting in Gaza. We welcome that, although, of course, now the next question, and we'll probably have this in an editorial very soon, is what next? There's no plan yet for Gaza. We have no idea who's going to run it next. We have no idea who's going to rebuild it, who's going to donate. It's just been left, no war and no peace. I hope also next week I have a piece coming out. Well, that's one I did when I've asked several experts on what they think will it take to end the fighting in Ukraine. And I should warn you that the answers are not very promising. The Russian from Moscow who answered, he's close to Putin, of course, he said, you've got to hand us Ukraine's head on a plate, otherwise we'll nuke you. We've edited that down a bit. Everybody else said we've got to continue giving Ukraine all the support we can to make sure it gets a good deal. But anyway, that's a long answer, but the editorials have changed. There are far fewer, and we hope they're far more significant. Nobody else. We can get down to dessert. Oh, yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Kendall Price. I was a fellow in South Africa from 1981 to 83, sort of at the height or depth of apartheid. When I returned, I would not have bet 25 cents that they would not have ended in a bloodbath. And to my shock and surprise, they did something unusual. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission turned things on its head. So my question for you is, pardon me, do you think in the near future or not too distant future for the US, we have the capacity to have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission for any number of the things that need a reset here in our country?
Thank you. Greg, I'm sorry I have that. Greg, could you paraphrase that for me, just Greg? I'm not entirely clear.
Kendall was a fellow in South Africa in the 80s and was expecting the apartheid to end in a bloodbath, and it didn't. It ended in Truth and Reconciliation.
Yeah, it's certainly, I was, as I said, we were in South Africa back then, and it is a miracle that it didn't end in a bloodbath, and I think Nelson Mandela is one major factor, but also the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And I think these things do work, but they have to have remarkable individuals and remarkable preparation. You really have to want to get out of it. South Africa, in fact, as you probably learned, had been preparing for transition for some time. There had already been many signs that this is where it was headed. And the leadership had been changing. Pik Botha, P.W. Botha, all the leaders who came were sort of bracing themselves for change. So that, in many ways, South Africa was a unique case with a unique leader in Nelson Mandela. I don't know where else it could work, but we certainly need something like that here, some kind of organized institutional ways to start discussing. I mean, all the commentaries that we heard during and since the end of the government shutdown was really everybody talking to their audiences and didn't bode well for reconciliation yet. But maybe we're getting there, and maybe it's worth looking at those examples. In the middle there.
Hi, Peggy Knudsen. I was on the ICWA board. Now I'm just a hanger-on. I could listen to you all day, so thank you for everything you said. We have a little bit of an East Bloc contingency here at this table. Some people compare USA 2025 to Germany 1933, or some of the things we've observed firsthand in the dictatorships of Eastern Europe, where the press is suppressed, where the universities are frightened and thought independence is maybe going by the wayside. Do you think that's a fair comparison? Is it oversimplified? And what are your thoughts on that?
You know, it's easy to get very alarmist because you can single out elements of what's happening and compare it to what happened elsewhere, where the results were horrible. You know, I think as I found trying to find precedents on my own, none of them ultimately hold firm. I mean, the United States there's still a free press. You know, Trump has sued the Times for $15 billion. That's B as in billion. You know, the paper would go under, but that's the first time it was thrown out of court, and I think it's going to be thrown out of court again. We're going to continue reporting. You don't have a kind of mass population that feels cowed or humiliated as a whole. I think a lot of people are waking up to the dangers of the current situation. I prefer to think we're not there yet where the countries were that fell by the wayside. We've taken a stumble. We've succumbed to a lot of self-pity, to a lot of kind of illusions, to illusions about an idealized past. But I would like to believe that we're going to be past it, and we're going to be past it soon. And I'm certainly not yet ready to start comparing it to Germany back in that era. But that's personal.
Thank you. My name is Fred Fisher, and occasionally I tune into Zoom for the Middle East Forum of Falmouth, and it started in Woods Hole a number of years ago, and I attended. And I've gotten 3 ideas from them about how to solve the Israel-Palestine situation, and I see no discussion of it in the press at all. I admit the ideas are extremely, they appear very unlikely. But evidently, there are people in Israel that have been studying for a long time to bring the communities together. They have agreed on a timeline that they both subscribe to, and what they come up with is that the Israelis and the Palestinians have to accept joint responsibility for the joint country. And they would all have to participate in the army. Well, that is a non-starter if you compare the armies on each side. So it would have to be the United States and major Arab powers controlling the thing for some time. But the other idea was it took a long time to bring peace to Ireland. I think it took a couple generations, and there were people working on it, well-funded for a long time. And you'll never change Netanyahu and the far right, but their children and grandchildren is a possibility. But this takes a long time working at it. And I just wondered if you've run into anything on this level.
Yeah, the question is about the Arab-Israeli conflict. As I said, I got to Israel back in '95 when everybody really thought that the conflict had been resolved, that all you had to do was sort of work on the details of Oslo. And yet, within a few months, it began to sort of completely fall apart. And before a year was up, Netanyahu had been elected and was trying in every way to undermine it. I think, to me, the problem in the Middle East is not finding the solution. I think right now I could sit down with a tablecloth and a pen and draw exactly how to divide it up and draw up the rules and the borders and how it would be parceled out. That's not the part. You know, there are plenty of peace plans. I think I've gone through at least 5 peace plans, including Senator Mitchell, who had worked on the Northern Irish, the Irish peace plan. He came and he tried to sort it out. The problem is how to get the two sides to come to it. And the problem is that each side has an automatic veto. You know, Hamas used its veto back in that terrible attack on Israel. Israel has used its veto any number of times in its own attacks. There are plenty ways to block any way to a peace agreement. The peace agreement itself, you know, the two-state solution, everybody says it's impossible, it's impossible. It's not impossible, it's the only solution. It's got to end up with 2 neighboring states with strict rules and borders. I have a feeling the Palestinians would get so wrapped up in their internal politics, internal struggles, as they did when we were there in '95. I attended a lot of sessions of the Palestinian Legislative Council. Wonderful people were fighting, and that they wouldn't waste a lot of time on Israel anymore, but how to get there. And sometimes I wonder if the best American role wouldn't be just to draw up a peace plan without participation of anybody and say, take it or leave it. Here it is. Here's how you've got to fix this. Now take it or leave it. But I don't know if that would work either.
Last question.
Okay, there's one in the, oh, sorry. Okay, I'm sorry, there was one in the back. The hand's been up all along, so, yeah.
Thank you so much for your comments. I was inspired by the way you described the 1960s, where next gen young people disagreeing maybe with their parents or the older generation, but still with a common view toward the future. We have folks from the Crane family who are based in Virginia. We know what happened in Virginia recently. Why did the New York Times come out against Mamdani, given what he represents for next gen and kind of the broader tent of coalition that might have represented?
Why did we?
Not support Mamdani, or come out against Mamdani.
I'll be honest, I don't know. I don't know. You know, I don't really participate in their discussions of New York politics, and I really wonder, I suspect the sense was that we're involved in a greater political struggle, and that in this greater political struggle, he might be a handicap. But I do wonder, it's a legitimate question, and I should ask next time I'm tackling my editors. But it was an amazing race in New York, and it shows that the Times is not the last word.
Serge, thank you so much. That was really, really, really terrific. Before signing off, I would like to thank ICWA's supporters for everything that you do. The Institute of Current World Affairs would not exist without you. Thanks to my colleagues, Bruce Teeter and Alex Ryan. For doing so much to organize tonight and our weekend. And thanks to you all for taking part tonight. Thank you. Good night.